Ethan was completely shattered. He had just lost his daughter, Lily, in a terrible accident, and he couldn't seem to find a way to cope. Lily had been only 10 years old when the tragedy struck. A bright, sunny afternoon when she had been at the neighborhood park, laughing and playing like any other child. No one saw it coming, and no one could explain it. Lily was gone, and Ethan was left with a deep, painful emptiness that consumed him. The loss was unbearable, and he felt like part of him had died with her. Lily had always been the light of his life. Her smile, her laugh, her energy, everything about her made his world brighter. He couldn't imagine his life without her. It felt wrong, as if the universe had suddenly lost its balance. She had been so young, so full of life, and now she was gone. Ethan tried to make sense of it, but nothing made sense. Every day felt like a struggle to keep breathing, to keep moving forward. But no matter how much he tried to accept what had happened, a small voice in the back of his mind kept telling him that something wasn't right, that something was missing. At Lily's funeral, Ethan stood beside her casket, feeling numb and detached from everything around him. She looked so peaceful, as if she were simply sleeping, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He kept staring at her, wondering if he was missing something, wondering if she was really gone. The thought of saying goodbye was too painful to bear. It felt wrong. It felt like he had been cheated out of the opportunity to say a proper goodbye. That night, Ethan lay awake in bed, unable to sleep. His mind raced with thoughts of Lily. He couldn't stop thinking about her. It was like a wound in his heart that wouldn't heal, no matter how hard he tried. He was consumed by grief. But there was something else too, a strange, gnawing feeling that there was more to her death than he could understand. The questions swirling in his mind kept him up all night, and as the hours passed, an idea began to form. It was irrational, even absurd, but it seemed to make sense to him in his state of grief and confusion. He decided to do something that many would consider insane. He decided to install a small hidden camera inside Lily's casket before her burial. It was as if he needed to know, to have some kind of proof that she was truly gone. Maybe, just maybe, the camera would bring him some peace, or at least some answers. Ethan knew it was strange, but at that moment, he didn't care. He needed to feel connected to her, even if it was just for a little while longer. He had no idea what he was hoping to find, but he felt like he had to do it. He installed the camera secretly, hiding it in a small corner of the casket, making sure it wouldn't be noticed by anyone else. It was his final act of love, even though it seemed like the most irrational thing he could have done. The next day, after the funeral, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He was still in a daze, but the thought of the camera kept nagging at him. He decided to turn it on. Maybe he would see something that would give him comfort, or at least help him understand what had happened. At first, the screen was blank. The casket was still, silent. Nothing was moving. But then, as he sat there watching the screen, something strange happened. A shadow seemed to flicker on the screen, like a brief distortion. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable, but Ethan's heart skipped a beat. And then, he heard something, a faint, barely audible sound. It was breathing, soft, steady breathing, like someone was alive inside the casket. Ethan stared at the screen, unable to believe what he was seeing. This couldn't be real. His mind screamed that it was a glitch, a mistake. But the breathing, it was so real, so human. His heart began to race, and a cold sweat broke out on his skin. Was it possible? Was Lily somehow still alive? The thought was insane. He tried to dismiss it, but he couldn't. The longer he stared at the screen, the more certain he became that something was wrong. This wasn't a mistake. The camera had captured something that defied explanation. He had to find out what was going on. Desperation took over, and he grabbed his phone, dialing his sister Tessa's number. His voice was frantic when she answered. "Tessa, you need to come over right now. It's Lily. There's something in the casket. I don't know what it is, but you have to see it for yourself." At first, Tessa thought her brother was just overwhelmed with grief, maybe even seeing things. She tried to calm him down, but the urgency in his voice made her change her mind. She quickly left her house and drove to his place. When she arrived, Ethan led her to the room where his computer was set up to watch the video feed from the hidden camera. She could see the panic in his eyes, and it scared her. She stared at the screen, expecting to see nothing. But then, just like Ethan, she heard the faint sound of breathing. It was so soft, but so unmistakable. Her heart skipped a beat. How could this be happening? Ethan was shaking, his face pale with fear. "It's not a glitch," he whispered. "This is real." Tessa stared at the screen, unable to comprehend what she was seeing. "It's impossible," she said, her voice shaking. "Lily's been buried. She can't still be alive." But Ethan couldn't stop thinking about it. He couldn't just sit there and do nothing. He grabbed his car keys and stood up, his decision made. "We're going to the cemetery." "No." Tessa tried to stop him, but the look in Ethan's eyes told her there was no talking him out of it. She was scared too, but she didn't know how to help him. She had no choice but to go with him. The drive to the cemetery was tense. Ethan's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Tessa sat quietly beside him, her mind racing. Could it be true? Could Lily really still be alive? It didn't make sense, but neither of them could ignore what they had seen. When they finally reached the cemetery, the moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie light over the gravestones. The place looked like something out of a nightmare. Ethan didn't hesitate. He grabbed a shovel from the trunk of his car and started walking toward Lily's grave. Tessa followed him, fear creeping up her spine. Ethan dug with frantic energy, his movements wild and desperate. He didn't care that it was late at night. He didn't care about anything except finding the truth. The sound of the shovel hitting the earth seemed to echo in the stillness of the cemetery. Tessa stood by, trying to calm her brother down, but her own fear held her back. After what felt like an eternity, Ethan finally reached the wooden lid of the casket. He stopped, his breath coming in short, panic gasps. Tessa watched in horror, unsure of what to expect. With trembling hands, Ethan opened the lid. What he saw inside made his heart stop. Lily's body was exactly as they had left it, still and pale. Everything seemed normal. But then, as if to shatter their world, Lily's lips moved. Then, from deep within the casket, a sound came. It wasn't Lily's voice. It was something else, distorted, low, and eerie, like it was coming from deep within the ground. The air seemed to grow heavier, colder. And then Lily's eyes opened. But they weren't Lily's eyes. They were empty, lifeless. Something had taken over. The body that Ethan had loved so much wasn't his daughter anymore. "Dad," a voice whispered from Lily's lips. But it wasn't her voice. It was a strange, layered voice, like many voices speaking at once. Ethan froze, his heart pounding in his chest. This wasn't Lily. This was something else. Something dark. Something that had taken her place. "You should have let us rest," the voice said, sending a chill down Ethan's spine. Suddenly, the ground trembled, and the temperature around them dropped. The air was thick with an oppressive force. Ethan stumbled back, horrified, but couldn't look away. The lights of the cemetery flickered, and then went out completely. Darkness enveloped them, broken only by the sound of Lily's voice echoing through the night. "You shouldn't have opened the tomb," the voice repeated, growing louder and more menacing. Ethan realized they had made a terrible mistake. He had to close the grave. They had to seal it, or this nightmare would never end. With all his strength, he and Tessa hurried to fill the grave with dirt, trying to close the coffin. But the whispers grew louder, hissing at them like angry spirits. Still, they kept working, and slowly they managed to cover the casket. As the coffin was covered, the voices faded away, and the bad feelings slowly disappeared. When the grave was completely sealed, the whole cemetery became very quiet. Everything stopped. The wind was still, and the air that had felt heavy with fear suddenly felt lighter. Ethan fell to his knees, feeling exhausted, his hands shaking and his body wet with sweat. Tessa kneeled next to him, tears falling down her face, her mind trying to understand what had just happened. They sat there for a long time, not moving, holding on to the quiet as if it could give them some peace. The darkness around them stayed, but the fear was gone, leaving behind a cold feeling in the air. "What was that?" Tessa asked in a weak voice, almost crying. Her question was more like a cry into the night than a search for answers. Ethan didn't answer. He was thinking about their daughter, Skylar, and the terrible thing they had just gone through. Whatever had taken over Skylar's body was no longer there, but Ethan still felt a strange feeling deep inside. It wasn't really over. They stayed in the cemetery for a long time, still not able to believe what they had just seen. But one thing was clear. Something dark and evil had taken over Skylar, and it should never be allowed to come back. "We need help," Tessa whispered, scared. "We can't leave this. What if it comes back? What if it's not over?" Ethan looked at her, his face tired and sad. He knew she was right. What they had seen was not something normal, and he was afraid just closing the grave wouldn't be enough. "You're right, but who can help us with something like this?" he asked quietly. Tessa, trying to calm herself, remembered someone who might know what to do. Father Gabriel, the local priest. He was known for helping people with strange, spooky things and had helped other families who faced things they didn't understand. Without wasting time, Tessa convinced Ethan to go see him. They arrived at the church just before dawn, very tired but determined to find help. Father Gabriel saw how scared they looked and listened carefully as Tessa told him everything they had experienced at the cemetery. Each word sounded harder to believe than the last, but the priest didn't interrupt. When they finished, Father Gabriel took a deep breath and walked to a shelf, where he grabbed an old prayer book. He turned to face them and said in a serious voice, "What you saw is something I've never dealt with before. There are spirits that can't rest, and sometimes they take over the bodies of the dead. It's rare, especially in places like this, but it's possible." Ethan felt cold when the priest said take over, and quickly asked, "Father, what can we do to make sure that Skylar, or whatever took her body, never comes back?" Father Gabriel lowered his eyes, thinking carefully. "It's not easy. You close the grave, but if that spirit is still connected to your daughter, it won't be enough. We need to perform a sealing ritual, a special prayer to cut the connection between Skylar and that evil force." Ethan nodded, feeling determined to do whatever it took to protect Skylar. Though he felt sad and scared, he knew there was no turning back. "Then let's do it. I can't let her stay trapped in that." Father Gabriel told them to come back at night, when it would be best to do the ritual. They tried to sleep during the day, but the thought of what was coming made it hard to rest. They knew when night fell, they would face something that would change their lives forever. As the sun went down and darkness filled the sky, Ethan, Tessa, and Father Gabriel went back to the cemetery. They brought candles, holy water, and the special prayer book. The air felt heavy, and they could feel the dread in their hearts as they walked towards Skylar's grave. When they reached the grave, Father Gabriel knelt down and started setting up an altar. He carefully placed candles in a circle around the spot where they had closed the casket. The flames flickered, casting spooky shadows on the ground. Ethan couldn't stop looking at the grave, his heart pounding in his chest. It wasn't just fear he felt. It was like something was still there, Skylar, or something else, trapped between the worlds, unable to escape. "Let no one break the circle during the ritual," Father Gabriel warned. "What we are about to face is dangerous. This spirit will fight back, but we must stay strong." Tessa nodded, even though she was shaking. Ethan also nodded, though his mind was full of worry. He only wanted Skylar to finally be at peace. Father Gabriel began praying in Latin, each word echoing in the quiet night. As he spoke, the air grew colder, and a chill swept over them, making the flames flicker. Then they heard something. A whispering sound came from the ground, like something was waking up underneath. Tessa stepped back, startled, but Ethan held her hand, reminding her to stay strong. Father Gabriel's voice grew louder and stronger as he continued the prayer, and soon, the ground above the grave started to shake. The whispers turned into moans, and something powerful seemed to rise from below the earth. Ethan could feel it, a dark, ancient force watching them, like something was trying to escape. "Father, hurry!" Ethan cried, his fear growing. Without waiting, Father Gabriel sprinkled holy water over the grave and kept chanting. The earth shook harder, as if whatever was beneath it was fighting to get out. Then, with a loud crack, the lid of the coffin broke open. A shadowy shape rose from the grave. It wasn't Skylar. It was something much darker. It looked like a person, but it was twisted and distorted, not fully human. Ethan felt the air leave his lungs, as if this creature was draining his very strength. The man's eyes were wide and scared. A loud, scary scream echoed through the cemetery, making him feel cold all over. Father Elias raised a cross in his hand and spoke strong, powerful words. The dark figure in front of them shivered and shook, like it was being pulled by something invisible. The figure tried to fight it, but it grew weaker. With one last, painful scream, it was pulled back into the ground, disappearing into the darkness. Father Elias finished the ritual, and everything went silent. The cold air slowly disappeared. It was finally over. Ethan, feeling tired and sad, fell to his knees. Tears streamed down his face as he looked at his daughter Lily's grave. "I'm so sorry," he whispered through his tears. Tessa, his sister, knelt next to him and hugged him. They stayed there together, letting the calmness take over them. Father Elias stood quietly, knowing the dark spirit was gone and Lily was now at peace. The graveyard was silent except for the soft sound of Ethan and Tessa crying. Father Elias still held the cross, but he looked down at the grave with tired, yet peaceful eyes. He knew Lily's spirit had moved on, and she was finally free. Ethan wiped his eyes and slowly stood up. Even though he was relieved that his daughter was free from the darkness, a part of him still felt broken. He had tried so hard to hold on to her. Now, even though the creature wasn't really Lily, saying goodbye felt very hard. "She's free now," Father Elias said softly, walking over to Ethan. "Lily has moved on. You helped her find the light. You can have peace knowing that." Ethan nodded, but his heart still hurt. He turned back to Lily's grave, looking at the fresh dirt on top. The air around him felt peaceful, as if everything was back in balance. "Thank you, Father," Ethan said, his voice soft and full of emotion. "I don't know how we can ever thank you." Father Elias smiled and shook his head. "There is no need to thank me. Just remember the love you gave her, not what happened here. Lily is at rest, and now it's time for you to find peace too." Tessa moved closer and hugged Ethan again. Even though they had been so scared, there was a feeling of peace. They both knew the fight was over, and the dark spirit wouldn't come back. But they would always remember this night. Father Elias started to clean up the things from the ritual. Ethan and Tessa stayed by Lily's grave for a while, honoring her. After some time, they stood up. It was time to leave the cemetery and try to move on, even though it would be hard. As they walked to the gate, Ethan looked back one last time. A gentle breeze blew, and he felt like Lily's spirit was right beside him, saying goodbye with love. There was no fear in the feeling, only peace. Tears came to his eyes as he and Tessa left the cemetery. They carried the weight of their loss, but they knew they had done the right thing. Lily was gone, but her spirit would always stay with them. Weeks passed, and life in the small town went back to normal. But for Ethan and Tessa, things would never be the same. They learned to live without Lily, even though they still felt sad. Something had changed, though. The fear they had felt before was gone. Even though they still missed Lily, they felt a strange kind of peace. Ethan decided to leave their old home. Every part of it reminded him of Lily, which made him sad. He found a small house on the edge of town, surrounded by trees. It was quiet, and he hoped it would help him heal. One day, while packing, he found a small wooden box. Inside were drawings that Lily had made when she was alive. Each one showed happy moments they had shared. Ethan smiled softly as he remembered how much Lily had loved drawing. It was her way of showing love, even without words. Then, Ethan found a drawing he had never seen before. It showed him and Lily holding hands under a tree, with sunlight shining down around them. Below, in big, uneven letters, were the words, "Always together, Dad." Ethan felt a lump in his throat as he gently touched the paper. It felt like he was holding on to Lily's love, even though she was gone. He carefully folded the drawing and put it in his pocket. He promised himself that he would never forget their bond. Outside, the wind blew softly through the trees. For a moment, Ethan felt a warm feeling in his heart, like Lily was still with him, sending him love. For the first time in weeks, he smiled gently. He knew it would take time to heal, but he also knew that somehow they would always be connected. "Hey, everyone, I want to take a moment to reflect on this story," said a voice. "This story might not be real, but the feelings behind it are something many people can relate to, especially parents. Ethan's grief is deep, and it's a reminder of how far parents will go when they're worried about their children. Sadly, many families go through real losses, and some situations end very sadly. The lesson from this story goes beyond ghosts and scary things, the voice continued. It reminds us that we need to keep our children safe, even in everyday life. Parents might not always see the small risks or dangers that are around. This story is a reminder for everyone, parents, siblings, or even friends, to look out for each other. There's also something important about supporting each other through tough times. We see how Tessa steps in to help Ethan, showing how important family is when things get hard. If this story made you think of something or made you feel something, share your thoughts in the comments. Maybe you can talk about a time you felt protective of someone you love. We all need to keep each other safe, so let's talk about it. Thanks for listening, and stay safe, everyone. If you enjoyed this story and would like to see more content like it, I encourage you to subscribe to my channel. By subscribing, you'll stay updated on all our latest, inspiring and heartwarming stories and have the opportunity to engage with our growing community. Additionally, I would love to hear your thoughts and feedback in the comment section below. Thank you for your support, and I look forward to sharing more captivating narratives with you.